trapped in suffocating darkness, wedged helplessly in narrow passages and fatal falls. Today, we uncover 11 horrifying cave disasters that will haunt your nightmares forever. Viewer discretion is always advised. Abbey Caves, located just outside Whangarei in Northland, New Zealand, are a well-known spot for explorers and school groups. With their winding limestone passages and stunning rock formations, they draw in adventurers from all over. But behind their beauty lies real danger. The caves are unregulated, and during heavy rain they can flood with terrifying speed, making them especially risky for anyone without much experience. The weather had been unpredictable all week. A thunderstorm warning was already in place for Northland, with heavy rain expected later in the day. Still, just one day earlier on May 8th, a group of Year 11 students completed their caving trip without any problems. Feeling encouraged by that success, Whangarei Boys High School decided to move forward with the next outing, this time to Organ Cave. But not everyone felt at ease. The night before, some parents began to worry. One even emailed the school to ask if the trip was still happening. After being told it was, they decided to keep their son home anyway. Karen's mother, Alicia Toki, shared the same concern. At 8:42 p.m., she emailed the school asking if the caves were safe. The reply came more than an hour later at 9:58 p.m. Yes, it's still on. We're watching the weather closely. The heavy rain isn't expected until around 3 p.m., and the students will be out by 1:30. Reassured, she allowed Karen to go. The next morning, May 9th at 7:30 a.m., the school checked the weather once more. Radar showed a storm hovering over Kaipara, but no new warnings were reviewed for Whangarei. The decision was final. The trip would go ahead, but the group would only explore Organ Cave. By 9 a.m., 17 students, a teacher, and an additional adult arrived at Abbey Caves. The rain was light as they suited up, pulling on overalls, strapping on helmets and headlamps, tugging on gumboots. Their phones were left behind in the van as there was no signal inside the caves. Between 9:30 and 9:45 a.m., the group stepped into Organ Cave, unaware of what was building above them. Outside, the skies grew darker by the minute. Rain hammered Whangarei, pounding against roads and rooftops. Thick gray storm clouds swept in, transforming the sky into a shifting curtain of darkness. Water spilled across streets, racing along sidewalks, pouring into drains already close to overflowing. Rivers rose quickly, their surfaces broken apart by relentless sheets of rain. At home, Karen's father, Andre Peter, watched the change with a growing sense of unease. His backyard was turning into a shallow pond. Small puddles expanded into wide pools, spreading across the grass. He flipped through weather updates, storm warnings, flood risks, advisories stacking one after another, each confirming what his eyes already saw. The storm wasn't just coming, it was already here. The forecast was wrong. The heavy rain wasn't coming later, it was already here. At 9 a.m., Andre picked up the phone and called the school. Were they still in the caves? He asked. It's flooding here. The reply he got was uncertain, the details vague. Hanging up, his gut told him something wasn't right. By 9:40 a.m., the flooding outside had only gotten worse. He called again, but this time no answer could put his fears to rest. At 9:50 a.m., he tried once more. The school told him not to worry. Inside Organ Cave, the students had no idea what was unfolding above ground. They followed the familiar creek bed, stepping carefully through shallow, crystal-clear water as it trickled over smooth rock. Each footstep sent out gentle ripples that shimmered in the glow of their headlamps. The cave walls, damp and textured, glistened in the light. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, moisture, and ancient stone. About 150 meters in, the passage split into two. The students chose the upper passage, where the ceiling rose higher and glowworms clung to the rock above them. Their faint blue-green glow pulsed in the darkness, casting an otherworldly beauty over the cave. For 20 minutes, the group stood in quiet awe, their voices hushed as they admired the eerie light. Some pointed upward, their helmet lamps throwing shaky shadows across the damp stone walls. When they first arrived, the water barely reached their knees, but then the teacher noticed something wasn't right. The trickle beneath them didn't sound like a trickle anymore. A low, rushing roar echoed through the cave, growing louder. The gentle stream was building into something far more powerful. He crouched, reaching down to touch the water. It was higher, rising quickly. Turning back, he searched for the entrance, but the faint circle of daylight was gone. The passage they had entered through was now swallowed in blackness. The water had cut them off. "We need to get out, now." The glowworms above flickered as boots splashed frantically through the deepening water. The students pushed into the main tunnel, but the cave had changed completely. What had been knee-high water was now up to their waists, surging with terrifying force. The tunnel had become a funnel, the current churning like a river with no way out. The teacher's voice cut through the roar. "Hold on to each other, stay together." The students obeyed, clinging to one another, gripping hands and locking arms, but the water slammed into them from every side, shoving their bodies, swirling around their legs, tugging hard to drag them under. Then, panic struck. A few lost their footing. One went under, then another. Their heavy overalls, soaked through, became anchors, pulling them deeper. Gumboots filled with water, weighing them down like concrete. Desperate, they fought to stay upright against the relentless current. But Karen was in the worst place possible, directly in the path of the strongest flow. Beneath them, the cave floor dropped into a deep hole, a natural depression carved by centuries of water. Normally, it was harmless, just a quiet pool before the stream spilled into the next chamber. But now, in the flood, it was something far more dangerous. The hole had become a deadly vortex, a siphon sucking everything down, dragging anything that entered into the narrowing crevice beyond. Karen was swept straight toward the hole. His feet slipped, the current tearing him off balance. Before he could react, he dropped into the depression, the water swallowing him up to his chest in an instant. His voice barely carried over the deafening roar. His classmates froze, horrified, until one of the older students lunged forward. He grabbed Karen's arms and pulled with everything he had, fighting against the raging current. But the water was merciless.
Karen kicked and gasped, twisting against the force dragging him down. The current wasn't just pulling him under, it was spinning him, pushing his body sideways, wedging him deeper between two massive boulders. The student gripped tighter, bracing his feet, trying to use his weight to haul Karen free, but every second pulled Karen lower, his waterlogged overalls dragging him down like an anchor. The student's grip began to slip. His own body trembled under the strain, knees buckling as the flood tried to sweep him away too. For one desperate moment, he gave everything he had left, heaving with a final burst of strength. Karen's body lifted slightly. He gasped, a flicker of hope. Then came a surge, a sudden, violent rush of water. The current surged stronger than before, ripping Karen downward and forcing him deeper into the crevice. The student holding him lost his grip. Karen's hands tore free. The last glimpse anyone caught was of his wide, terrified eyes, his mouth open in a silent scream, before the water swallowed him whole. For a fleeting moment, his body could still be seen beneath the surface, twisting, limbs flailing desperately, and then he was gone. One student later recalled the moment. "I can't really remember. It was all a blur. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, he was just gone." Outside at 10:35 a.m., the emergency call went out. Sirens cut through the heavy rain as responders raced toward Abbey Caves. At the entrance, 16 surviving students stood soaked to the bone, shivering from the cold and from shock. Some clung to one another, others sat frozen in silence. But one of their classmates was missing. Police arrived, followed by search and rescue teams, but the cave was still raging with floodwater, too dangerous to enter. All rescuers could do was wait. Karen's family had rushed to the scene by then, forced to watch, helpless, as hours passed with no news. Finally, by 7 p.m. the floodwaters began to recede. The torrent that had thundered out of the cave slowed to a steady rush. Rescuers finally moved in. Using underwater optical cameras, they searched the black, hidden crevices where the raging water had forced everything into the rock. The feed flickered, cutting through the darkness until they saw him. Karen's body was pinned against a rock formation, his leg trapped between boulders, locked in the very place where the floodwaters had funneled him. At 9 p.m., after nearly 11 hours, they recovered him. Outside, his family had waited all day in the storm, clinging to hope. Now, their worst fear was confirmed. But this was more than just a tragic accident. It It was a brutal reminder of nature's power and of the terrible cost when its warnings are ignored. The tragedy shook New Zealand. Investigations later revealed that the school had failed to properly assess the risks even after repeated warnings. In May 2024, WorkSafe New Zealand charged the school's board with exposing students to the risk of serious harm or death. By July, the board pleaded guilty. The court ordered them to pay over $500,000 in reparations, acknowledging the devastation left behind for Karen's family, his friends, and his classmates. Karen Peters' death was preventable. The Abbey Caves disaster remains a haunting reminder. When nature warns you, listen.
August 15th, 2000. The morning light barely reached the limestone cliff as 15 teens from Camp Wilderness stood at the entrance to Duffield Cave. Group leader Mr. Peterson checked his watch and did a final head count. 17-year-old Emma Jeffrey adjusted her helmet and tested her headlamp. She wasn't new to this. She'd explored dozens of caves across Pennsylvania with her family. The cave yawned open before them like a dark mouth. Emma stepped in with the rest, adrenaline rising. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. They crawled through wide passages, slid past flowstone, and entered a massive chamber with soaring ceilings and ancient stalactites. Emma's beams swept across the formations as they pushed deeper into the system. Then they reached the section locals called the Pretzel, Duffield Cave's most twisted passage. It snaked through the rock in tight, unforgiving curves. First a crawl, then a sharp climb, a left twist, sudden drop, sharp right, and finally an angled squeeze toward a distant chamber. Most of the group hesitated. Many chose to turn back. The Pretzel looked brutal, tight, twisted, unforgiving, but Emma had faced worse. She studied the entrance, mentally tracing the sequence. Up, left, down, right, then up again. A puzzle she'd solve with her own body. She dropped down headfirst and began army crawling into the passage. Her headlamp lit smooth limestone walls shaped by ages of flowing water. The space barely cleared her shoulders. The first upward bend came fast. She twisted, pressing her boots against the wall to push herself up. Her helmet scrimped the ceiling. The rock was cold against her body. Next came the left turn. Emma rotated her torso to follow the curve, her shoulder grinding one wall, while her hip brushed the other. The passage tightened. Then the drop, narrow and steep, like sliding into a mail slot. Her chest pressed against the rock, ribs tightening with each breath. Her breathing grew shallow. Behind her, faint voices echoed, but they were distant now. The right turn changed everything.
Panic hit instantly. Her heart pounded as she realized she was stuck completely. Every movement wedged her in deeper. What felt snug moments ago now squeezed like a vice. Her chest tightened. Breathing became quick and shallow. Her headlamp beam jerked as fear shook her body. The surrounding darkness crept in, turning the narrow tunnel into a coffin. Despite the cave's chill, sweat soaked her face. She tried to scream, but the pressure on her lungs choked the sound. Only faint gasps escaped, swallowed by the rock. Her friends, just 30 feet away, couldn't hear a thing. Until one of them finally realized she wasn't coming out. Their voices echoed through the cave, calling her name. When Emma finally answered, her voice was weak, but it was enough. The urgency in their replies told her they knew something was very wrong. The next 4 hours were a blur of panic and failed rescue attempts. Her friends tried everything. They pulled her legs, but the twisted tunnel made a straight pull impossible. They pushed from behind, only to wedge her tighter. Then came the mistake. They poured water around her, hoping to reduce friction, but the limestone soaked it up instantly. Worse, the cold water clung to her body, leaching away her warmth. The cool cave air turned harsh. Emma's body temperature began to drop. Hypothermia set in slowly, then all at once. At first, she trembled. Then the shivering turned violent. Her muscles clenched uncontrollably, making the tight space feel even tighter. Her thoughts blurred. She couldn't focus. Her mind began to drift. She started whispering to the walls, apologizing, pleading, asking the cave to let her go. Meanwhile, above ground, a full-blown rescue operation was taking shape, one that would soon be remembered as legendary in Pennsylvania cave rescue history.
It started when the landowner dialed 911, shaken by the panic in Emma's friends as they stumbled out of the cave. First came the local police, then the fire department. Paramedics followed close behind. Within hours, specialized technical rescue teams from 3 counties swarmed the area. They tried anyway. They lowered equipment, sent their smallest firefighters into the tunnel, but no one could reach Emma. The passage's tight, twisted shape stopped every attempt. It didn't matter how brave or skilled they were, this was a different world, and the usual tools didn't work here. As the sun dipped behind the trees, turning the sky orange and purple, someone finally made the call that changed everything. They reached out to the local caving community. Within an hour, veteran cavers from across the region were arriving at Duffield Cave. These weren't just explorers, they were people who lived underground, people who knew how to move through rock like it was second nature, people who understood that saving Emma would require more than gear. It would require strategy, patience, and nerves of steel. Eventually, one of the rescuers, small, wiry, and experienced in navigating impossibly tight spaces, managed to reach Emma. He squeezed his way to her position, took in the scene, then carefully backed out to discuss the next move with the rest of the team. And that's when the breakthrough came. The solution was surprisingly simple and just a little embarrassing. After hours stuck in the narrow passage, Emma's clothing, soaked with water, sweat, and cave grime, had swollen and bunched up in critical spots. In a place like the pretzel, where even a half-inch of extra bulk could be the difference between freedom and being wedged in place, this seemingly minor detail was everything. So the team got to work. They removed most of Emma's clothing with precision and care, doing their best to preserve her dignity while prioritizing her life. Then, they reached into their kit and pulled out something unexpected: cooking oil. The rescuers coated her skin generously with the oil, creating the kind of slick surface that water simply couldn't provide against the thirsty limestone. Slowly but surely, the rock began to release its grip. What followed was a delicate, hour-long operation, every movement calculated, every angle considered. They didn't just pull her out, they reversed the entire journey, guiding her body through each twist and bend in reverse, carefully supporting her weight and making sure she didn't catch or jam at any point. It wasn't brute force that freed Emma. It was patience, planning, and a deep understanding of how the cave worked. When Emma was finally pulled free from the pretzel's narrow jaws and propped back to the surface, she was barely clinging to consciousness. Her body was ice cold, her skin pale and clammy, the early signs of hypothermia written all over her. Hours trapped in damp, unmoving rock had trained her completely, both physically and mentally. Paramedics moved in immediately. Warming blankets were wrapped tightly around her, and IV fluids were started to rehydrate her and stabilize her vitals. She couldn't speak much, her energy nearly gone, but she was alive. And miraculously, aside from a few scrapes and bruises, Emma had made it through the entire ordeal without a single serious injury. She walked out of that hospital with a new understanding of risk, of survival, and just how terrifyingly tight the line is between life and death deep underground.
Sherdro and John Hadar had endured a brutal divorce, shouting matches, bitter fights, and resentment that seemed endless. Their families had seen it all and doubted they could ever be civil again. But on Sunday afternoon, August 24th, 2003, something changed. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was the need to prove they could still be around each other without chaos. Whatever the reason, they ended up driving toward Hubbard Cave in Glenwood Canyon, a place filled with memories of better days. They didn't tell anyone where they were going. Not Sherry's daughter, not John's friends, not a single person. It was a sudden decision, one that felt harmless at the time. The cave entrance loomed before them, dark and silent. They'd been here before, back when they trusted each other, back when they worked as a team. Now they stood at the entrance, strangers bound only by a shared past. What was meant to be a quick visit turned into something deeper.
The cave seemed to call them, offering an escape from the wreckage of their failed marriage. With a click, their flashlights lit up the darkness, and they stepped inside. The first passage was tight, forcing them to turn sideways. Soon they were crawling through spaces barely wide enough for their shoulders. The cave twisted endlessly, a three-dimensional maze. Left, right, up, down, every path looked the same. They kept moving, following one passage into another, drifting farther from the surface with every turn. Then it happened. They reached a junction where three tunnels met, and nothing looked familiar. John's flashlight cut through the dark, but every rock formation looked identical. They tried backtracking, then new routes, but each path led to the same confusion. The cave had them now, trapped deep within its heart. As their flashlights began to fade, panic crept in. They stumbled upon a tiny alcove, barely big enough for both of them to squeeze into. The cramped space forced them to sit shoulder to shoulder, pressed tight. John's light flickered twice and went out. Sherry's lasted only minutes longer before darkness swallowed them whole. The silence was absolute. The cave's temperature dropped fast, and they had nothing. No food, no water, no extra clothes. All they had was hope, but hope was fragile. No one knew they were there. Monday came and went in a blur of cold and hunger. They huddled together for warmth, taking turns sleeping as their bodies fought off hypothermia. Above ground, life carried on. Sherry's daughter, Raya, assumed her mother was busy somewhere. John's friends thought he was simply coping with the divorce in his own way. By Tuesday evening, worry turned into dread. Raya tried calling her mother's house. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. A cold knot formed in her stomach. She dialed John's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic began to spread as the family gathered, sharing their fears. Where could they be? Some whispered that maybe the two had reconciled and slipped away together. Others feared something far worse. Everyone remembered the brutal divorce, the screaming, the resentment, the threats. John's anger had been unsettling, his bitterness impossible to ignore. By nightfall, the anxiety was unbearable. Raya called the Garfield County Sheriff's Office to report them missing. Sheriff Lou Valario opened an investigation immediately, and family members didn't hold back. They warned him about John's volatile temper and painted a chilling picture. A man pushed past his limits, possibly capable of something unthinkable. The possibility that John might be vengeful and violent changed everything. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It could be a crime. Deep inside the cave, John battled more than cold and hunger. The divorce had gutted him, and being trapped beside Sherry, knowing she was lost to him forever, gnawed at his mind. Anger and despair twisted together in the darkness. One flashlight still had a faint charge. Its weak glow barely pierced the blackness, but it was enough. John reached into his pack and pulled out a hammer and chisel he'd brought along. He gripped them tightly, his face set in grim determination as he shifted closer to Sherry, preparing for his next move. By Tuesday, helicopters joined the search. The Air National Guard swept the area from above, looking for any sign of Sherry, John, or their vehicle. Nothing. Each passing hour deepened the dread. Family members grew frustrated with the lack of progress, convinced that time was running out, and that every lost moment could mean the difference between life and death. Thursday morning, the family decided to act. A close friend who was a pilot offered to help and took off, using Sherry's house as the starting point. Just 30 minutes into the flight, he spotted their Suburban parked at the trailhead near Hubbard Cave. He immediately radioed the coordinates to authorities. Deputies rushed to the scene, but the discovery only deepened their fears. Sherry had been with her ex-husband, just as suspected, and the parked vehicle seemed to confirm their theory of foul play. Instead of launching an immediate rescue, they secured the area and treated it as a potential crime scene. Yellow tape surrounded the Suburban as deputies searched for signs of a struggle. A search dog led officers straight to the cave entrance, but they only called out into the darkness. No detailed search was conducted. When desperate family members and friends volunteered to go in themselves, deputies refused, citing safety concerns. The assumption was clear. John had brought Sherry here to harm her, maybe even kill her. The cave seemed like the perfect place to hide evidence. As thunderstorms rolled in, officials suspended the search and sent everyone home. The decision enraged family members who knew every hour mattered, but deputies insisted they were following proper protocol. By Friday morning, the family returned to the site, frustrated and desperate. After heated arguments, deputies finally allowed them to search inside the cave themselves. Raya Dro and her brother grabbed flashlights and entered without hesitation. They called out for their mother and John, their voices echoing through the dark passages. Following a map, they moved deeper into the 400-foot, 122-meter long cave. Then they noticed fresh markings carved into the stone. The markings formed a clear trail, guiding them straight to where Sherry and John were waiting. Within minutes, they discovered the pair, weak but alive, huddled together in their cramped shelter. Relief, joy, and anger mixed in an overwhelming rush. After 4.5 days trapped in total darkness, they had survived. The rescue itself was surprisingly simple compared to the chaos leading up to it. Family members guided Sherry and John back through the tight passages to the cave entrance, where medical personnel were waiting. Both were dehydrated and exhausted, but in remarkably good condition, after spending more than 4 days without food or water in the freezing cave. Somehow, they had managed to keep each other alive.
John and Sherry had no idea about the suspicions and drama outside. In the darkness, survival had been their only focus. They took turns sleeping while the other kept watch. It was only after the rescue that the truth surfaced. John had used his hammer and chisel to carve directional markers into the cave walls, marking everywhere they had been. He had believed that if no one came and they were close to death, he might still save Sherry by helping her find a way out. The man suspected of violence had actually been planning her survival. In truth, Sherry had only intended to show John the way to the cave, but later they both decided to explore deeper. Back outside, tempers erupted. A heated argument broke out between family members and deputies. The family accused the sheriff's department of delaying the rescue by treating the case as a potential crime instead of an emergency. Despite their bitter divorce, John and Sherry had relied on each other to survive 4 days of darkness. Deputies had wasted precious hours searching for evidence of a crime that never existed. After their initial examination, Sherry and John declined for their medical care. They climbed into their Suburban and quietly drove to a local hospital, leaving behind a storm of frustration and anger. Family members were still furious over the ordeal. Sheriff Lou Valerio defended his department's actions, insisting they had followed proper procedures, but the public criticism was relentless. Yet, beneath the anger, the situation revealed something extraordinary about human resilience. Two people who had once been bitter enemies managed to rely on each other to survive an ordeal that could have claimed their lives. Their time trapped in the cave changed something deep between them. Facing death together stripped away past grievances and reminded them of their ability to work as a team when it mattered most. July 3, 2021. Sharp's Cave in Virginia yawned open like a black mouth in the mountainside. 40-year-old Arland glanced at his watch one last time before stepping into the darkness, his 19-year-old daughter Lexi right behind him. It was 3 p.m. on a warm summer afternoon. The goal was simple: explore the cave and find the legendary underground waterfall other cavers had described. But what seemed simple would soon turn into a nightmare. Arland and Lexi were what experienced cavers call tourist cavers, drawn to the thrill but lacking training and proper gear. They carried only basic flashlights, not the reliable lighting systems seasoned cavers use. No helmets shielded them from jagged rocks. Their clothing wasn't suited for the cave's damp, freezing air. But excitement overshadowed caution. Finding that hidden waterfall felt like a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. Other visitors had spoken about its beauty deep within the system, and curiosity pulled them further in. Sharp's Cave wasn't an ordinary cave. It was a labyrinth of twisting passages, multi-level chambers, and endless dead ends. The cave sprawled for miles underground, forming a three-dimensional maze where getting lost was too easy. The waterfall they sought wasn't marked on any map. To reach it, they had to push through unmarked sections like Catfish Hall, where tunnels branched into multiple directions, and every path looked exactly the same.
The formations inside created natural hazards where anyone could become disoriented within minutes of leaving the main passage. As Arlen and Lexi moved deeper, their cheap flashlights started to fade. The cold, damp air drained the batteries faster than expected. Caves are notorious for killing power quickly due to constant humidity and low temperatures. Still, they pushed forward, focused on finding the hidden waterfall. The deeper they went, the more twisted the cave became. Side tunnels branched off in every direction. Some revealed stunning formations and hidden chambers, while others ended in sudden drops or dead ends. Without maps or navigation skills, they were blindly gambling with their lives. Hours dragged by as the cave twisted into an endless maze. Every turn split into another choice, left or right, up or down. They tried to retrace their steps, but in the suffocating darkness, every rock looked identical. The walls blended together, offering no clue where they had been. By 6 p.m., they were completely lost. Inside, the temperature stayed at a chilling 54 degrees, about 12 degrees Celsius. Without proper clothing, hypothermia was closing in. Their weak lights were dying fast, sinking them deeper into absolute darkness. Panic crept in. Arlen forced himself to stay calm for his daughter, but fear was clawing at him inside. They had no backup lights, no supplies, no way to call for help. Worse, no one above ground even knew where they had gone. For hours, they wandered, shouting for help, but sound works strangely underground. Sometimes voices echo endlessly through limestone corridors. Other times the rock swallows them whole, making it impossible for rescuers to find their source. As the hours dragged on, desperation grew. Dehydration set in, and their bodies burned through energy reserves just to stay warm. The crushing darkness and psychological strain were wearing down both father and daughter. Above ground, Arlen's two younger kids, ages 10 and 16, grew increasingly worried. He'd promised to be back by evening for a 4th of July family barbecue. By 11:30 p.m., with no sign of them, the teens decided to call 911. At first, the dispatcher treated it as a routine missing person report, but when the teens explained their father and sister were exploring a cave system and now 8 hours overdue, the call was upgraded to emergency status immediately. The alert triggered a massive response. The Shaver Fork Fire Rescue Team arrived first, but quickly realized this wasn't a standard search and rescue. Cave rescues demand specialized training, gear, and expertise. Unstable rock, flooding risks, hypothermia, and disorienting passages can endanger rescuers as easily as the trapped victims. Virginia State Police reached out to Jennifer Bull from the Eastern Region National Cave Rescue Commission. A veteran of dozens of underground rescues, Bull had faced many emergencies, but Sharp's Cave was new territory, making this mission far more challenging. She quickly assembled her team, her husband and 2 children, all trained in cave rescue, and headed straight to the cave with emergency equipment. At 1:30 a.m. on July 4th, they began a hasty search, a fast reconnaissance to locate the missing cavers before the cold claimed them. Armed with powerful LED lights, communication gear, and medical supplies, they entered the darkness. But Sharp's Cave had other plans. Even with proper equipment and training, Bull's team couldn't locate the waterfall area where Arlen and Lexi were thought to be trapped. The cave was too complex, filled with branching passages and hidden chambers. They searched the most obvious routes first, but found nothing. Time was slipping away. Every passing hour increased the risk of hypothermia or dehydration. After 2 hours, Bull made the hard call to exit and request massive reinforcements. This rescue would need multiple teams and specialized gear. By 8:30 a.m., around 40 cave rescue specialists were converging on Sharp's Cave. It became one of the largest cave rescue efforts in Virginia's history. Teams from several counties arrived with advanced communication systems, warming gear, medical supplies, and powerful lighting. The rescue operation unfolded like a carefully orchestrated military campaign. Each team was assigned a specific section of the cave, ensuring no area was left unchecked. Field telephones were installed, running from the surface deep underground, creating a lifeline of communication in a place where radios were useless. Every passage was methodically searched, and each was marked to avoid wasting precious time by retracing steps. By around 10 a.m., Christopher Spence and Mystic Miller formed a search team assigned to a challenging section known as Catfish Hall. Initially, rescuers had dismissed this area, believing it was too difficult for inexperienced cavers to reach. That assumption turned out to be wrong. Deep inside Catfish Hall, Spence and Miller stumbled upon a sight that stopped them cold. In the dim beam of their flashlights, they spotted two shadowy figures huddled together in a corner. As they crept closer, their lights revealed the unbelievable. It was Arlen and Lexi. Both were alive, but barely. Exhausted, cold, and dehydrated, the two had been trapped in the cave for a staggering 19 hours. Their bodies trembled from hypothermia. Their flashlights had died hours earlier, leaving them in total darkness. Dehydrated, exhausted, and terrified, but still alive. Spence and Miller jumped into action. They gave them warm clothing, food, and water, then handed over proper cave lights to guide them out of the maze. The climb back took hours. Arlen and Lexi had to be carefully led through passages they couldn't have crossed alone. Every step was planned to avoid injury or collapse. When they finally reached daylight, both suffered mild hypothermia and severe dehydration, but they were alive and unharmed. What made the story remarkable wasn't just the rescue, it was what came next. Despite everything, Arlen and Lexi never lost their love for caving. Instead of fear, they wanted to learn how to do it right. Mystic Miller, one of the rescuers, invited them to join Greenbrier Grotto, a local caving group teaching proper techniques, safety, and conservation. Instead of being banned from caves, they were welcomed into a community that would help them explore safely. September 11, 2002. The morning began like countless others in Hawaii's rural Fern Forest subdivision. 3 hunters prepared their gear in the pre-dawn darkness, checking headlamps, spare batteries, and emergency supplies one last time. Their destination was familiar, the Captain's Trail, a winding path leading through dense forest toward the Pu'u'o eruption area. They'd navigated these trails before, but Hawaii's landscape always held surprises. The path twisted through thick vegetation and towering tree ferns, everything appearing normal at first. Then, at some point, the hunters made a fateful decision. Whether following fresh tracks or chasing curiosity, they strayed from the established trail. In Hawaii's volcanic terrain, this seemingly small choice became dangerous. The island's unique geology hides a vast network of lava tubes. Hollow tunnels formed when flowing lava cools on the surface, while molten rock beneath continues to move. These tubes stretch for kilometers underground, creating a treacherous maze beneath their feet. The hunters soon came across what looked like a cave entrance, and curiosity won over caution. The opening seemed safe enough to explore, but they were unknowingly stepping into Hawaii's most complex lava tube networks. These weren't simple caves with clear paths. They were twisting, branching tunnels like an underground maze. Some passages sank deeper into the mountain, while others connected to entirely different tube systems. Without maps or detailed knowledge, navigation quickly became a challenge. Hours passed and excitement turned to concern, then real fear. Under the harsh glare of their headlamps, every tunnel looked the same. Each turn led to another identical passage, and retracing their steps only made them more lost. Above ground, families grew worried when the hunters failed to return on time. Experienced or not, they knew Hawaii's volcanic terrain could be unforgiving. As darkness fell over Fern Forest, a call to emergency services was finally made. The Hawaii County Fire Department received a report of 3 missing hunters last seen near the Captain's Trail. Calls like this weren't uncommon given the island's rugged terrain and maze-like lava tubes. Firefighter Brett Matsuda, 41, was among those responding. A seasoned member of the department, he had years of experience in technical rescues and had faced Hawaii's toughest environments, from dense forest to unstable volcanic ground. He knew better than anyone how dangerous this landscape could be. Matsuda understood the urgency. In Hawaii, missing persons faced multiple threats: dehydration, hypothermia in underground spaces, hidden pits, unstable terrain, and the ever-present risk of active volcanic activity. Time was critical, and every minute counted. At first light on September 12th, search teams fanned out from the captain's trail, each taking a possible route the hunters might have followed. The jungle was brutal. Walls of ferns, vines, and undergrowth formed green tunnels that swallowed rescuers whole. In places, the growth was so thick they walked across the tops of plants, never touching the ground below. This was the hidden danger of Hawaii's volcanic landscape. What looked like solid ground was often just vegetation suspended over empty space, concealing caves, pits, and lava tubes. Locals knew to watch for subtle dark patches where plant growth shifted, a telltale sign of a hidden opening. Around 10 a.m., firefighter Brent Matsuda pressed through a thicket when his foot landed on what seemed to be firm ground. In an instant, the ferns collapsed beneath him. The floor he trusted vanished, revealing a camouflaged void hidden under the jungle's cover. The hidden opening measured about 1.5 by 2.4 meters, large enough to be deadly, yet perfectly masked by dense vegetation. Without warning, Brent Matsuda plunged straight into darkness, falling nearly 30 meters into one of Hawaii's massive lava tubes. It was a sheer drop into the unknown, silent, violent, and sudden. The impact at the bottom was brutal. Matsuda's helmet and backpack absorbed part of the force, but the damage was catastrophic. He suffered broken ribs, making each breath agonizing, spinal injuries that risked paralysis, and severe internal damage to his liver and kidneys, vital organs now compromised. Above ground, his team heard his distant cry and instantly knew what had happened. In Hawaii, rescuers were all too familiar with this nightmare. The lush jungle concealed countless hidden pits, making every step a gamble. The mission instantly shifted from finding the missing hunters to rescuing one of their own. Brent Matsuda lay seriously injured at the bottom of the lava tube, trapped by smooth volcanic walls that made climbing impossible. His condition left him unable to move, and time was running out. Firefighters quickly assembled their rope rescue gear and began a high-risk extraction. The narrow opening barely allowed equipment and rescuers to be lowered, and the slick walls offered almost no natural anchor points. Every step required precise coordination and technical skill. Matsuda was carefully secured in a harness, each movement calculated to avoid worsening his spinal injuries. Once lifted to the surface, he was immediately readied for air evacuation. A helicopter was called in to transport him to the nearest trauma center. The remote location made ground transport impossible, and with Matsuda's life hanging in the balance, there was no room for delay. While rescuers raced to save Brent Matsuda, the original mission pressed on with renewed urgency. Search teams pushed deeper into the wilderness, now fully aware of how dangerous the terrain really was. Matsuda's fall had exposed the hidden network of lava tubes beneath their feet, giving rescuers vital clues about where the three missing hunters might have vanished. The team split into smaller groups, each following different potential paths through the volcanic landscape. They scoured the area for other concealed cave entrances, hoping to find a connection to the same underground system where Matsuda had fallen. By now, the hunters had been missing for over 24 hours, and time was slipping away. Using their knowledge of local geology and insights from the newly revealed tube system, rescuers mapped out the most likely routes the men could have taken. At each opening, they called into the darkness, pausing to listen for any sign of life. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A search team member, carefully working through a section of tubes several hundred meters from Matsuda's accident site, suddenly stopped in his tracks. He heard something faint, human voices echoing through the volcanic passages. Following the sound, he moved deeper into the twisting tunnels, navigating cautiously through the smooth, shadowed walls. The voices grew louder until he finally discovered the three missing hunters. Huddled together in a wider chamber, they were cold, exhausted, and without working lights, but they were alive. The hunters had endured nearly 24 hours trapped in the labyrinth-like system. Inside the constant 18 degrees Celsius temperatures of the lava tubes, their bodies had begun to succumb to mild hypothermia. Confusion and sluggish thinking had set in, but they were conscious and, with assistance, able to walk to safety. The rescue team carefully guided the hunters through the winding lava tubes, navigating the complex underground network with precision. After hours of cautious movement, they finally emerged into daylight, tired, cold and shaken by their ordeal, but requiring only warmth and rehydration. Meanwhile, at the hospital, doctors confirmed the severity of Matsuda's injuries. His broken ribs had punctured tissue, making every breath painful. Spinal damage required immediate stabilization to prevent paralysis, and internal injuries to his liver and kidneys posed a serious threat to his survival. He was listed in critical but stable condition, though doctors remained cautiously optimistic. In the days that followed, against all odds, Matsuda made a full recovery. January 25, 1986, 4 cave explorers set out for a long-planned expedition into Parker's Pit Cave, a destination known among spelunkers for its steep vertical drops and extreme technical challenges. The cave demands advanced rappelling skills and specialized equipment to navigate safely. Unlike horizontal caves, where you crawl or walk through passages, Parker's Pit is a vertical system, where one mistake can be fatal. That morning, the group arrived fully geared, confident they had the right equipment for the descent. Among them were experienced explorers who had tackled vertical systems before, but experience can't replace strict safety discipline. As they prepared to descend, their first major challenge awaited: a 22-foot, 6.7-meter vertical drop requiring precise rappelling technique and flawless equipment handling. The upper bound was more than just a drop. It was a deadly trap waiting to claim the unwary. A 22-foot, 6.7-meter fall onto solid limestone could mean shattered bones, crushed skulls, or snapped spines. 2 of the explorers descended safely, using proper rappelling technique and reaching the bottom without incident, unaware of the disaster about to unfold above. The 3rd explorer began his descent, but had unknowingly made a critical mistake while rigging his carabiner brake bar device, a tool designed to control descent speed on a rope. When set up correctly, it provides smooth, controlled rappelling. But this device demands precise rigging. The rope must pass through the carabiner, over the brake bar, and back down through the carabiner again. This path creates the necessary friction to control descent and avoid a deadly freefall. Unfortunately, the 3rd explorer made a catastrophic error in his setup. While the rope passed through the carabiner and over the brake bar, he skipped the critical final step, threading it back down through the carabiner. Without this, the brake bar was useless, offering no friction and no control over his descent. The trap was set. Just 22 feet, 6.7 meters below, the unforgiving limestone floor waited. The moment he stepped off the edge, the device failed instantly. The rope slipped freely, and terror struck as he realized he was falling. The walls blurred around him as he plummeted through the darkness, the whoosh of air rushing past his ears. Gravity dragged him down mercilessly, faster and faster, while the others watched in frozen horror. Then came the sickening impact as his body slammed into the limestone floor. The team expected to find their companion's broken body on the limestone floor and rushed toward him. But when they reached the impact site, they were met with something that defied all logic. The fallen explorer was conscious and moving. Against every odd, he had survived a fall that should have killed him instantly. Shaken, but somehow uninjured, he struggled to his feet. It was nothing short of a miracle. Yet while his body seemed intact, the psychological shock hit hard. His hands trembled uncontrollably as the reality set in. He had just stared death in the face. The sensible choice would have been to abort the mission and get him checked immediately. But in a decision that bordered on madness, the group chose to continue deeper into Parker's Pit. The man who had just cheated death insisted he was fine and pushed forward with the planned exploration. This choice revealed a deadly mindset, the belief that surviving one close call makes you untouchable. Ignoring the warning signs, they descended deeper into Parker's Pit, where the passages grew more technical and the dangers multiplied. Waiting below was the cave's most infamous obstacle, the Z-bend. A true nightmare passage, it forced explorers to twist and contort their bodies through spaces barely wider than their shoulders. The Z-bend had trapped people before, locking them in positions where they couldn't move forward or back. The first caver entered feet first, sliding on his belly. He wriggled carefully toward the first sharp bend, warning the others how tight it was. The second followed close behind, also feet first, but this time lying on his back. The moment he slid into the Z-bend, its deadly nature became clear. The limestone walls seemed to clamp around his body, locking him in place as he struggled forward. Every slight movement made the rock's grip tighter, pressing against his chest and making each breath harder to draw. Just before the first sharp turn, reality hit him. He was trapped. The limestone's embrace left no room to move forward or back. What had seemed like a challenging squeeze seconds ago was now a life-threatening situation. The Z-bend compressed his chest, turning every breath into a battle for air. Panic made things worse. As his body tensed with fear, his chest expanded slightly, making the already narrow passage even tighter. The stone walls no longer just confined him, it felt like they were trying to crush the life out of him. The others heard his desperate cries for help and knew time was running out. If they didn't free him quickly, the Z-bend would claim another victim. The rescue began instantly, but the tight, twisting passage made every move dangerous for both the trapped man and his rescuers. One positioned himself behind the victim, while another worked from the front, each risking entrapment themselves. The unyielding limestone resisted every attempt to shift his body. Every push, every pull felt like a fight against the stone itself. The rescuers were forced into contorted positions, edging dangerously close to getting stuck alongside him. Meanwhile, the trapped man's breathing grew shallow, his face pale as the relentless pressure crushed his chest. Oxygen deprivation was setting in fast. Inch by agonizing inch, they worked to pull him free from the Z-bend's stone grip. Every small movement became a battle won against the unyielding limestone, which seemed determined to claim another victim. The rocks scraped their skin and tore at their clothing as they forced their way forward, squeezing through spaces that felt impossible for the human body to navigate. Their trapped friend's strength was nearly gone when at last they managed to work him through the worst of the Z-bend. His body slipped past the narrowest point just as his endurance reached its breaking point. A few more minutes and the passage would have claimed his life through sheer exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. The successful extraction marked the end of what had turned into a nightmare expedition inside Parker's pit. 2 potentially fatal incidents in a single trip, an extraordinary concentration of deadly encounters, could have easily left at least one of them dead.
September 24th, 2005, Sequoia National Park. 8 researchers gathered at the entrance of Empire Mine Cave. Leading the team was Shane Freer. With him were Mindy Goldberg, a 25-year-old explorer, Dave Bunnell, a 53-year-old veteran, and Joel Despain. Their mission? Explore and document the forgotten ruins of a silver mine carved into the earth back in the 1870s. Empire Mine Cave doesn't welcome visitors easily. The entrance is a vertical pit, straight down. No walking in, no gentle slope. To reach the cave floor, you need ropes, harnesses, and precise technique. Each team member prepared carefully. Ropes were anchored to solid points. Every knot, every carabiner, every harness was checked and rechecked. In vertical caving, one mistake can be fatal. Shane went first. As team leader, it was his job to test the descent. His harness was locked in. Headlamp switched on. Rope system loaded. And then, one step at a time, he disappeared into the darkness below. Shane moved slowly, scanning each section as he descended. A lead caver's job isn't just to go down, it's to read the cave, spot hazards, test anchor points, keep the team safe. Above, the rest of the group waited, gear ready, nerves steady. The real journey was just beginning. Shane's rappel into the entrance pit went smoothly. Once he was secure at the bottom, Mindy began her descent. She followed the same path and landed safely. Without pause, she moved past Shane and into a narrow chimney passage that extended deeper into the cave. Shane stayed behind, watching as Mindy disappeared.
Chimney passages are a different kind of challenge. These narrow, vertical cracks force cavers to wedge themselves between opposing walls, using their backs, feet, and hands to inch through. It's slow, awkward, and physically demanding, very different from walking a horizontal tunnel. Next up was Dave Bunnell. At 53, he was a seasoned explorer. His rappel was flawless, the ropes held firm, and he reached the bottom of the pit without trouble. But caves don't follow rules. Even after decades of stability, a shift underground can change everything in seconds. Dave was about to face that reality. As Dave began his descent into the chimney passage, following the same route Mindy had just taken, the cave turned hostile. Without warning, a rock that had sat undisturbed for who knows how long suddenly broke free. No one knows exactly what triggered it. Maybe it was the repeated foot traffic, maybe it was a subtle shift in temperature, or maybe it was just time finally catching up to the cave. Whatever the cause, the result was immediate and brutal. The rock struck with precision. It crushed Dave's cave pack against the wall and clamped down on his leg, wedging him tightly in the narrow chute. He was completely stuck. Trapped in the space barely wide enough to move, Dave now faced one of the worst-case scenarios in caving, a chimney entrapment. With walls pressing from both sides and the stone bearing down, any rescue would be complicated and slow. But Dave had something on his side: experience. Decades of caving had trained him for chaos. Instead of panicking, he stayed calm and began to assess the situation. Moving had to be precise. One wrong shift could trigger more rockfall or worsen the jam. Ironically, the same pack that got him stuck might have also saved him. Wedged between him and the full weight of the rock, it acted as a buffer. Just enough to keep things from getting worse. Now, the real test began, getting out before the cave decided to shift again. Using a mix of sheer determination, practice technique, and raw strength, Dave finally managed to wriggle free from the crushing grip of the fallen rock. But the relief was short-lived. What he saw next made his stomach drop. The rock hadn't just tumbled down and rolled away, it had lodged itself firmly into a new position, sealing off the narrow chimney passage. What had once been a navigable route was now completely blocked. In a matter of seconds, the cave had reshaped itself, and with it, changed everything. Below the obstruction, Mindy was now trapped. She had passed through safely just minutes earlier, but now that same route was gone, cut off by a massive slab of immovable stone. Alone in the tight lower section of the chimney, she was confronted with a chilling realization. She was sealed inside, isolated from the rest of the group, and the only known exit. The sound of rockfall, followed by Dave's frantic calls for help, snapped Joel Despain into action. As an experienced caver, he immediately understood the seriousness of what had just happened. Cave rescues are never simple. The unforgiving terrain, narrow spaces, and unpredictable structure make any intervention slow, risky, and complex. And now, their situation had shifted from a close call to a full-blown emergency, with a teammate trapped and time working against them.
Even with a trio of seasoned explorers on hand, Joel's rapid descent into the cave marked the start of a desperate makeshift rescue. There was no time to wait for a formal team or specialized equipment. What they had on site was all they could count on. Unlike surface rescues where professionals can swarm in with high-tech gear and manpower, cave emergencies demand something else entirely: skill, ingenuity, and nerves of steel. In these lightless chambers, the only lifeline is often the people already inside. Now facing a crisis deep underground, Dave, Dane, and Joel found themselves staring down a brutal problem. A massive rock, far too heavy for one person to move, stood between Mindy and her only escape. Shifting it even slightly would require more than strength, it would require engineering finesse under crushing pressure. The three men leaned on their years of experience, quickly transforming into a team of underground problem solvers. Every move had to be precise. They examined the rock from every angle, searching for leverage points, debating force application, calculating risk in real time. One wrong nudge could trigger another collapse. But they had no choice. This wasn't about moving rock, it was about saving Mindy's life, and the cave wasn't giving them much time to get it right.
The tight confines of the chimney passage severely limited what the team could do. There was no room for pulleys or large equipment, just raw human strength, simple tools, and whatever natural leverage they could muster from the cave walls around them. Then, after hours of calculated effort, came the breakthrough. The team managed to shift the massive stone just enough, just inches, to open a narrow space above it. The gap wasn't much. It looked impossible, but it was just wide enough for one determined person to try. That sliver of space was the line between a nightmare and escape, and Mindy was ready to fight for it. Mindy's escape wasn't just a climb, it was a test of precision, nerve, and endurance. The narrow gap the men had carved offered no margin for error. She had to contort her body with perfect control, every movement slow and deliberate, careful not to wedge herself or dislodge any loose rock. But inch by inch, she made her way through. When she finally emerged on the other side of the blockage, the cave was silent, then filled with a flood of relief. The nightmare was over. Even after ensuring Mindy's safety, the team didn't walk away immediately. They attempted to reposition the rock, hoping to restore the chimney to its original state, not just for themselves, but for anyone who might enter this cave in the future. It was a gesture of respect for the cave, for the caving community, and for the land itself. April 26, 1999 was supposed to be another routine technical dive for Guido Gudenzi. Instead, it became the day a single moment of confusion nearly cost the 29-year-old his life in Florida's Depolar Spring. Gudenzi wasn't inexperienced. With 4 years of cave diving behind him, he knew the unforgiving demands of technical diving, where every breath and every decision carried life or death consequences. He had trained extensively in mixed gas diving, a complex method allowing divers to reach depths impossible with standard scuba gear. That morning, Gudenzi descended into Depolar Spring alongside fellow divers Simone Rancoli and Sandra Dirksen. Their goal was an immense underwater chamber resting 190 feet below the surface, around 58 meters down. At that depth, the pressure was nearly 6 times greater than at the surface, drastically altering how gases interacted with the human body. The 3 divers carried multiple gas tanks, each filled with carefully calculated mixes of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium for specific depths. This wasn't casual diving with a single tank. Technical diving demanded precision, where using the wrong gas at the wrong depth could be instantly fatal. Each diver also carried a dedicated oxygen bottle for their final decompression stop. Standard protocol required leaving these oxygen tanks at the 20-foot decompression stop, where breathing pure oxygen was safe. This wasn't optional. It was a critical safety rule designed to prevent fatal mistakes. Pure oxygen becomes toxic beyond 66 feet, 20 meters. At such depths, increased pressure turns life-sustaining oxygen into a deadly poison, capable of triggering sudden convulsions and drowning within seconds. Every trained diver knew this rule by heart, which made what happened next all the more shocking. Gudenzi broke protocol. Instead of leaving his oxygen bottle at the 20-foot decompression stop, he carried it with him into the depths. Whether to keep it close or out of concern for equipment placement, the choice would prove fatal. The descent itself went smoothly. The 3 divers moved with precision, their lights slicing through the still, dark water. Around them, ancient limestone walls bore the marks of millions of years of erosion, forming surreal passages few had ever seen. At 190 feet, 58 meters down, they reached their destination. The vast underwater chamber opened like a submerged cathedral, its sheer walls fading into the darkness beyond their beams. At this crushing depth, unprotected lungs would collapse instantly, but their specialized gear allowed them to breathe, suspended in an alien world of silence and pressure. They spent time photographing the chamber and studying its formations, surrounded by absolute silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of their breathing gear. In this alien world, every breath mattered, every movement had consequences. Once their exploration was complete, they began their ascent, the most dangerous phase of any deep dive. Gases compressed under extreme pressure had to be released slowly to avoid decompression sickness. Each stop was critical, allowing their bodies to adjust gradually. Their first major stop came at 120 feet, about 37 meters below the surface. There they hovered motionless in the cold water, starting the long decompression process. The surface felt impossibly far above them, with several more stops between them and safety. At the 120-foot decompression stop, Gidenzi made a fatal mistake. For reasons no one would ever know, he switched from his primary breathing mix to the pure oxygen bottle he had carried from the surface. Whether it was confusion or stress, his decision proved catastrophic. The instant pure oxygen entered his lungs at that depth, the results were immediate. The extreme pressure turned the oxygen into a toxic dose, overwhelming his system in seconds. His central nervous system was hit hard, triggering sudden oxygen poisoning. Gidenzi's body went into violent convulsions. His limbs thrashed uncontrollably as his nervous system failed under the chemical assault. Within moments, he lost consciousness entirely, and the mouthpiece slipped from his lips, drifting into the clear, silent water.
Rankley and Dirksen watched in shock as their skilled partner slipped into crisis. At 120 feet, 37 meters, they faced every diver's worst nightmare, an unconscious buddy deep underwater with almost no margin for error. Instantly, they switched to emergency mode. Training had prepared them, but the reality was far more brutal. Gidenzi was convulsing violently, unresponsive to any rescue attempt. Without his mouthpiece, he wasn't breathing the gas keeping him alive. They fought desperately to save him, struggling to force the regulator back between his lips as his uncontrolled thrashing made it nearly impossible. Every second drained their strength and burned through their own gas reserves, but they refused to give up, battling both time and the crushing depth around them. The physics of death turned against them. At 120 feet, 37 meters, a rapid ascent wasn't an option. Shooting to the surface would almost certainly trigger fatal decompression sickness. They were trapped by their own decompression schedule, forced to balance their survival while trying to save Gidenzi, an impossible equation underwater. Minutes dragged by as hope faded. Gidenzi remained unresponsive, his convulsions relentless, making rescue breathing impossible. Every attempt failed, and the two divers faced the unbearable truth. Their friend was slipping away right in front of them, and there was nothing they could do. What made it worse was how preventable it was. Oxygen toxicity limits were no mystery. Every technical diver knew pure oxygen was safe only above 66 feet, 20 meters. These protocols existed precisely to stop tragedies like this, yet one critical mistake had sealed Gidenzi's fate. Standard protocol required leaving oxygen bottles at proper decompression stops, specifically to prevent the kind of confusion that killed Gidenzi. By placing them at 20 feet, 6 meters, divers avoided the deadly risk of accidentally breathing pure oxygen too deep. Technical diving left zero room for mistakes. Unlike recreational scuba, where errors might cause inconvenience, a single lapse here could be instantly fatal. The extreme depths, complex gas mixes, and strict decompression schedules created an environment where precision was everything. After exhausting every rescue attempt, Rankley and Dirksen faced a grim reality. Gidenzi was gone, claimed by oxygen toxicity. Now their focus shifted to survival. They had to complete decompression carefully and make it back to the surface, ensuring this tragedy didn't take more lives. The ascent must have felt endless for the survivors. Every decompression stop dragged on, each minute stretching painfully as they replayed the horror of watching Gidenzi slip away. They had no choice but to endure it. Skipping stops would have meant risking their own lives to decompression sickness. It was a cruel paradox, trapped between the need to survive and the helplessness of leaving their friend behind. When Rankley and Dirksen finally surfaced and reported the tragedy, the news rippled through the diving community. Gidenzi had been a seasoned diver with 4 years of cave diving experience under his belt. The idea that someone so skilled could make such a basic error shocked everyone and served as a sobering reminder. In technical diving, even the smallest lapse in judgment at extreme depths can be fatal.
Hidden deep in Mexico's wilderness, Sotano del Barro lures thrill-seekers with its stunning vertical drop, a 764-foot descent into darkness. But on August 22, 1999, this breathtaking cave became the scene of a devastating tragedy. Christy Quintana, a 26-year-old passionate caver, joined fellow explorers Miguel Angel Blanco, Rocio Medina, Sanchez, Sergio Sanchez Armas, and Alfredo Silva for what was meant to be an unforgettable adventure. After a grueling 2-hour hike through rugged terrain, they finally reached the cave that afternoon. At the entrance, they spotted loose rocks scattered around the edge. Knowing the danger, they cleared the debris and rigged a rope at the lip, preparing for their daunting vertical descent. Miguel, Christy, Medina, and Sanchez volunteered to explore the cave, while Silva and Sergio remained at the surface to assist if needed. The descent began smoothly. One by one, they vanished into the depths, surrounded by jagged rocks. They explored, documented, and marveled at the cave's beauty, unaware of the danger looming ahead. By nightfall, it was time to climb back. Christy and Miguel went first, following their planned route. But at 10:30 p.m., disaster struck. Christy was about 130 feet below the surface, with Miguel about 50 feet lower when a section of the cave's lip suddenly collapsed. Tons of rock broke free, thundering down the vertical shaft. The deafening roar echoed through the cave. Suspended helplessly on the rope, Christy took the full force of the collapse. Massive rocks slammed into Christy's head, shoulders, and back, shattering her cervical and lumbar vertebrae and leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. Just below, Miguel escaped by pure luck, his position shielding him from the falling debris. At the cave's bottom, Medina and Sanchez stood frozen as the thunderous collapse shook the chamber. Huge boulders crashed down, blocking parts of their exit. Dust and debris filled the air, choking the air and blinding their vision. Regaining his composure, Miguel climbed toward Christy. Her condition was critical. She was conscious, but in excruciating pain, her body trembling from shock. What he saw was devastating. Her legs were lifeless, her body broken by the brutal force of the rocks. Miguel did everything possible, stabilizing Christy on the rope, whispering reassurance, trying to ease her pain, though every strained breath revealed her agony. Below, Medina and Sanchez sensed disaster, but remained trapped, unable to help. Realizing rescue was the only chance, Miguel carefully climbed past Christy and began his ascent through the unstable shaft. Around 11:30 p.m., he reached the surface, where Silva and Sergio were devastated by the news and took a moment to compose themselves before acting. The team acted fast, rigging a makeshift hull system with what little equipment they had. It became a race against time, but without proper pulleys or mechanical gear, progress was agonizingly slow. Worse still, the loose rocks at the cave's lip had to be stabilized before attempting to pull Christy out. Every minute felt critical as they worked desperately. By 2:30 a.m., they had managed to lift her to within 12 feet of the surface. Miguel rappelled back down to guide her over the edge, but when he reached her, dread took over. Christy wasn't breathing. Hours suspended on the rope, combined with severe internal injuries, shock, and harness-induced pathology, a condition that restricts circulation and accelerates fatal outcomes, had claimed her life. Miguel, shattered but resolute, tried to pull Christy's body over the lip, but exhaustion and the unstable terrain made it impossible. With no other choice, Sergio began a grueling 2-hour hike through the darkness to reach their vehicle and call for help. By morning, a rescue team arrived. Meanwhile, Medina and Sanchez remained trapped at the bottom, cut off and helpless for over 16 hours. Hunger, thirst, and the psychological weight of the disaster above pressed heavily on them. By 2 p.m., rescuers reached the 180-foot constriction where rocks from the collapse had lodged. After clearing the path, they descended further, finally reaching Medina and Sanchez, offering food, water, and reassurance. By 5 p.m., the two finally emerged from the cave, exhausted but alive. Yet the relief was overshadowed by the devastating reality Christy hadn't survived. For the survivors, that night would haunt them forever. Could anything have saved her? The rescue report concluded that even immediate intervention might not have changed the outcome. Lowering her to the bottom of the pit might have offered temporary relief, but her injuries were catastrophic. Without advanced medical care, hours away in the remote wilderness, survival was unlikely. July 19, 1988. The Ottawa River near the Quebec border hosted what was supposed to be a routine cave diving camp organized by the Speleological Society of Quebec. For 2 weeks, expert divers had been mapping the flooded passages beneath the river's islands. Among them were 37-year-old Jean Lemeray and his partner Luc Leblanc, both seasoned divers well aware of the deadly risks caves can hide. Lemeray was respected, precise, cautious, and disciplined, the kind of diver who knew a single mistake could be fatal. That day, he and Leblanc approached a spring they'd been exploring throughout the camp. At the surface, it looked harmless, a small pool nestled between rocks. But beneath that still water stretched a labyrinth of submerged tunnels. They slipped below the surface, beginning their descent. The passage was both stunning and claustrophobic, a flooded tunnel roughly 6.5 feet high and 16 feet wide. Sediment from earlier dives clouded their visibility, adding to the tension. The cave dropped to a depth of 20 feet, 6 meters, making a direct escape to the surface impossible under the solid rock ceiling above. They swam upstream, carefully laying a thin guideline behind them. This rope was their lifeline, the only way back in a maze where a wrong turn meant certain death. Every cave diver follows the golden rule: never lose contact with your line and always reserve enough air to return safely. At 295 feet, 90 meters into the system, they reached their planned turnaround point. This wasn't random. Cave divers strictly followed the rule of thirds, using only 1/3 of their air for entry, 1/3 for the return, and keeping 1/3 for emergencies. As they prepared to head back, Lemeray noticed a small leak in one of his regulators and signaled Leblanc. They returned to the surface pool where Lemeray dismantled and cleaned the regulator, standard procedure for technical divers. Once confident the gear was fixed, they descended again to survey the 295 feet, 90-meter passage they had just explored. This second dive was supposed to be routine, almost uneventful compared to their first. At the end of their guideline, 295 feet, 90 meters from the surface, Lemeray signaled to Leblanc to begin their exit. It was standard protocol. The dive leader leads the way, and both divers follow the line back together. Nothing hinted at the disaster waiting ahead. Leblanc got slightly tangled in the guideline, a common issue for cave divers. He freed himself in seconds, but when he looked around, Lemeray was nowhere in sight. Visibility was terrible, and the stirred-up sediment cut their view down to just a few feet.
Thinking Lemeray had gone ahead, Leblanc followed the line toward the entrance. Everything felt normal. The same tight passage, the same darkness, the same slow journey back towards safety. He had no reason to think anything was wrong until he surfaced and realized he was alone. When Leblanc surfaced in the entrance pool and saw no sign of Lemeray, his worst fear took hold. Lemeray should have been there waiting, reviewing the dive and preparing for their next exploration. Instead, Leblanc faced the horrifying reality that his partner was still trapped somewhere in the flooded cave. Without hesitation, he dove back in, following the guideline through 295 feet, 90 meters of submerged passage to search for Lemeray. The return that had taken minutes before now felt endless as Leblanc battled rising panic and his dwindling air supply. At the end of their survey line, Leblanc made a discovery that would haunt him forever. Jean Lemaray's body floated motionless in the water, suspended in the narrow passage he had explored countless times before. His regulator was out, but his mask remained in place. He was gone. Most disturbing of all was the blood smeared inside Lemaray's mask, a chilling sign that something catastrophic had unfolded in his final moments. This wasn't the case of equipment failure or getting lost in the labyrinth. This was a sudden medical emergency, one that had struck in the worst possible place, deep inside a flooded cave. Leblanc now faced an impossible decision. His air supply was running dangerously low after the prolonged search, and he was still 295 feet, 90 meters from the surface. His partner was gone, and attempting a full-body recovery without proper equipment would almost certainly cost him his own life. Cave diving protocol was brutally clear: save yourself or risk becoming a second fatality.
With a heavy heart, LeBlanc tried to move Lamari's body toward the entrance, but every inch drained precious air he didn't have. Finally, reality forced his hand. He made the gut-wrenching decision to leave his friend behind in the darkness and head for the surface alone. The swim back was pure torment. Every kick, every exhale carried the crushing weight of abandoning Lamari in the silent black void below. It was a decision that would scar LeBlanc's mind forever, one that no diver ever wants to face, yet one he had no choice but to make.
The following day, professional recovery divers returned to the cave equipped with specialized gear and fresh air supplies to retrieve Lamari's body. But what they uncovered only deepened the mystery and made the tragedy even more unsettling. When they examined Lamari's equipment, everything was working perfectly. His regulators functioned flawlessly during testing, and his air tank still held plenty of breathable gas. There was no sign of an equipment malfunction, no entanglement, and no navigation error. Dr. K. David Sawatsky later conducted an in-depth analysis and proposed two possible medical explanations. The blood found on Lamari's mask suggested he might have suffered a sudden, severe nosebleed. If his regulator slipped out during the episode, he could have suffocated within moments. Alternatively, he may have experienced a catastrophic cardiovascular event, such as a ruptured aneurysm or sudden cardiac arrhythmia, causing him to lose consciousness instantly. What shook the cave diving community to its core was the sheer unpredictability of his death. Lamari wasn't reckless, he wasn't inexperienced, his gear was sound, his skills proven. Yet in an environment where even the smallest problem can turn deadly, a sudden and random medical emergency had claimed his life, leaving divers everywhere painfully aware of just how little control they have when deep beneath the surface. In open water, a nosebleed is inconvenient. A brief, irregular heartbeat might make you dizzy, but you usually have options. At 295 feet deep, trapped inside a flooded cave, there are no options. Any medical issue, anything that compromises your ability to breathe or think clearly, is an instant death sentence. There's no emergency ascent, no buddy breathing, no calling for help. For LeBlanc, the psychological toll was unimaginable. He had found his partner's lifeless body in that silent, underwater tomb, and then had to make the brutal choice to leave him there. That kind of decision doesn't fade with time, it stays with you. Jean Lamari's death shattered the illusion that skill and preparation can always keep you safe. In environments this hostile, sometimes it doesn't matter how experienced you are, how carefully you plan, or how perfect your gear is. Sometimes, the cave wins. And the most terrifying part? The greatest danger is often the one you never see coming. On the weekend of April 12, 1980, 4 divers from Texas arrived at Vortex Springs in Holmes County, Florida. Ronnie Tyner, Johnny Swan, Merritt R. Stagger, all 24, and Russell D. Hill, 23, had one goal: to explore the water-filled cave system hidden beneath the spring. Vortex Springs was a known destination for cave divers, beautiful, deep, and deadly. By 1980, it had already claimed 24 lives. Just 30 miles away, Morrison Springs had taken 28. These were not beginner-friendly waters. Cave diving was dangerous, one of the most unforgiving forms of underwater exploration, requiring precision, training, and strict safety. But danger didn't deter the curious. The caves drew people in, promising winding tunnels, massive chambers, and a silence unlike anything on land. Divers came from all over, eager to slip beneath the surface and enter a world few ever saw. Tyner, Swan, Stagger, and Hill were no different. Young, confident, and hungry for the challenge. They came prepared. Their gear was checked, their dive plan discussed. They likely stood at the edge of the spring, watching others vanish beneath the water, only to return later wide-eyed with stories of towering rock formations and miles of submerged passageways. The 4 men enter the water, ready to see it for themselves. But in cave diving, even the best preparation doesn't guarantee a safe return. Beneath the surface, the cave system was a maze. Visibility could vanish in seconds. A wrong turn, a missed air check, or a silk cloud stirred by a fin could end everything. They weren't just diving into water, they were entering a place where time, light, and sound disappeared, and the only thing standing between life and death was discipline and a direct route home.
The group had some diving experience, but lacked the specialized cave diving certification needed for this environment. Like many before them, they likely felt confident, believing their open water training would be enough. But beneath the surface waited a world that demanded precision, calm under pressure, and flawless execution, qualities even seasoned divers struggle to maintain in a cave. They suited up beside the spring, surrounded by the familiar sounds of preparation, regulators hissing, metal clips clinking. Then, they entered the water. Their descent was quiet, marked only by a stream of rising bubbles. They adjusted gear, equalized pressure, and pushed deeper. Fins stirred the sandy bottom, briefly clouding the water before the steady flow cleared it again. Ahead, the cave mouth yawned open, inviting and ominous. As they moved inside, the daylight behind them faded. Their dive lights flickered to life, casting sharp beams through the crystal-clear water. Walls of limestone glowed in the artificial light, revealing a cathedral of stone carved over thousands of years. With every kick, the outside world slipped further away. The silence grew deeper, the current more steady. They were now inside a place few ever see, and where even fewer return if things go wrong. They had passed the threshold. Now, the cave would decide what happened next. Silence surrounded them, broken only by the steady hiss of their breathing. They moved in formation, staying close, each diver's light cutting through the still water. The cave walls shifted from smooth to jagged, shaped over centuries by flowing water. Roughly 250 feet in, they reached a warning sign, bright letters glowing under their lights. This was the official stop point. Beyond this, only certified cave divers were allowed. The message wasn't a suggestion, it was a final warning. Turn back or risk your life. Many before them had obeyed it. These four did not. They pushed past the sign. At the entrance to the deeper cave system, they tied off a guideline, a thin twine-like material meant to lead them back if visibility failed or panic struck. It was their safety net. But it wasn't proper cave line. Too thin, too fragile. The kind of mistake that only becomes clear when it's too late. They continued into the darkness. Their lights danced across narrow tunnels and high ceilings. The sense of direction faded with each twist and turn. Behind them, the guideline trailed through the cave, flimsy, vulnerable. They were now well beyond the safe zone. What lay ahead would test everything they thought they knew about diving. And that guideline? It wouldn't hold. As they moved deeper, the water grew colder. It seeped through their wetsuits, a chilling reminder of how far they'd left the surface behind. Their lights scanned the rock walls, catching flashes of small fish darting into crevices, the only signs of life in the still, silent cave.
They pushed forward, maneuvering through tight passages. The air in their tanks slowly ticked down. Visibility remained steady, until it didn't. Maybe it was silt stirred by a misplaced fin or a subtle shift in current. Maybe it was panic creeping in as they realized how far they'd gone. Hundreds of feet now separated them from the entrance. Every move mattered. Every breath was a calculation. Then, something went wrong. No one knows exactly what happened, but none of them surfaced. Hours passed. Other divers at the spring noticed their absence and called for help. The sheriff organized a response, and a team of expert cave divers arrived to begin the search. Among them was Johnny Manuel, a veteran of rescue and recovery. He knew what this likely meant. Divers suited up and descended into the same cold void the four men had entered. Their goal? Find them, or what was left. Manuel had seen what caves could do, how quickly they punished the unprepared. This was no longer a rescue. It was a recovery. What rescuers found painted a grim scene. The four divers were discovered about 100 feet past the warning sign, tangled in their own guideline, limbs entwined in thin twine,
motionless in a knot of chaos. Their knives, strapped to their legs for emergencies, remained untouched. "They were in about as big a mess as I've ever seen," said John Emanuel. "That line was all over them. I imagine one got tangled, panicked, and dragged the others into it." The state of their bodies told the rest of the story: panic, confusion, and failed escape. The leading theory? One diver likely lost buoyancy, drifting upward and allowing slack in the line to wrap around him. As he struggled, the line snared him further. The others rushed to help, but in doing so, they were drawn into the tangle. It wasn't a lack of effort or courage, it was the brutal reality of cave diving, where even a single mistake can spiral out of control in seconds. The guideline, meant to be their lifeline, became their trap. By the time rescuers reached them, it was too late. All they could do was recover the bodies and piece together the tragedy. Vortex Springs had claimed again, reminding everyone that the cave does not forgive.
And when ignored, its warnings turn fatal. Another theory points to a critical miscalculation of air. Cave diving demands strict gas planning, enough to go in and more to get back. If they pushed too far, they may have realized too late their air was running out. In desperation, they might have turned the wrong way, burning oxygen and energy. As their tanks emptied, their breathing would have grown heavy. Carbon dioxide built up, triggering a suffocating panic. In those final moments, they may have rushed for an exit, only to get further tangled in the line. Their last breaths likely came with a crushing sense of dread as the reality closed in. A third possibility: light failure. If their primary lights went out and no backups were used, they would have been swallowed by total darkness. In caves, no light means no direction. No way to tell up from down, left from right. Even experienced divers struggle in that kind of blackness. Reaching for their guideline, they might have found it twisted and useless. Whatever the cause, whether it was air, light, or entanglement, the end was the same. Ronnie Tyner, Johnny Swan, Merritt Stagger, and Russell Hill never made it out. Their bodies were recovered, but their story became a warning, one carved deep into the legacy of Vortex Springs. The cave had already taken lives. This tragedy made the count higher, and it reminded every diver of one brutal truth. When a cave says stop, it means it. Ignore the warning, and the cave may never let you leave.